Okay then. So you all are here because you're interested in the Stephen ministry, and we're all here to talk about Stephen ministry, which is a ministry, national ministry, and a particular ministry here at St. Peter's. So, it's always good to know that you're in the right place. Sometimes, you show up someplace and you think, oh my God, I didn't mean to be there for that. So hopefully you all came for Stephen ministry, I'm sure you did. So before we actually begin with our wonderful panel, I would like each of you to think, just take a moment to think, to sort of recollect a time when something happened to you, either an untoward diagnosis or a loss of some kind or something in your life. And how is it that you hoped to be heard when you talked about that? Okay? Just give that a minute's thought. We've all had stuff because we're all human beings, and that's just part of what happens to us as human beings. We've heard the doctor say, oh, I'm sorry to tell you it's cancer. Or I'm sorry to tell you there's nothing more we can do for your partner. Have you had the experience when that's happened to you of being heard? When you said to a friend, when you said to your partner, when you said to a child, when you said to a friend, this is what's happened to me. Have you had the experience of being heard or felt heard? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Yes. So we all know what it's like to be heard. And being heard is really important for us. And I think probably most of us have had the experience of not being heard. And that can be traumatic, if not devastating, actually. I remember a long time ago when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I was at a clergy conference, and the bishop, unbeknownst to me, announced to the entire gathering that I had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Well, most of my colleagues ran in all directions because nobody wanted to talk about that. And that was very difficult. So we want to be heard. Stephen ministry is really essentially, and at its heart, about being heard. Heard for who we are, for who we really are. And the people that you're going to hear this evening, both Stephen ministers and care receivers, are going to be able to talk to you about that. Just so you know a little bit of the detail, Stephen ministry was not thought up by St. Peter's, smart as we are. Actually, it's a Missouri Synod Lutheran pastor whose name is Stephen Houck, in 1975 began to think about how can I deepen the pastoral ministry in my congregation. And he is both a pastor and a clinical psychologist. So he blended the work of pastoral ministry with psychological awareness. And that became the basic curriculum for training Stephen ministers. Now you might ask, why are they called Stephen ministers? Why not David ministers or Janice ministers or, Chris Marks ministers? Well, the reason they're called Stephen ministers, probably pretty obvious to you, is that the first martyr and deacon in the church was named Stephen. And the actual meaning of the word deacon is to serve. And so Stephen ministers, it's almost a redundant term, means service. And it is the service of caring, of listening, of being present to another person. There are at least, I counted, it's always hard to keep track, but I think there are 18 Stephen ministers at St. Peter's. Nope, there are more.
About
20?
24.
But some
24.
are on break, as it were.
No.
And some take a little break. And there are men and there are women. And men, Stephen ministers, meet with male care receivers, and women Stephen ministers meet with women care receivers. The training, as you're going to hear later on this evening, is extensive. It's really great training because it's all about how to have an effective relationship, one that not only exudes and is caring, but that has boundaries and cares for the well-being of another person by not being so intrusive. You're going to hear much more detail about that than you will from me. We're going to end this evening with questions. Some of you may wish to become Stephen ministers. Some of you may want a care receiver, to become a care receiver. You may want a Stephen minister. I don't know. But now for the prayer part. I'm going to begin with a prayer that's familiar to all of you, and it is I think, a particularly apt prayer for Stephen ministry from St. Francis. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Amen.
So this evening, you have with you two very seasoned and wonderful Stephen ministers, Carol Zorick and Robert Delanos, and two people in our parish, Eleanor Boyce and Chris Mark, who have been care receivers and are wonderfully willing to share with you their experience, and Jack Anderson, who has been recently trained as a Stephen minister and Stephen leader, so he can tell you everything. So, Carol, let's begin with you and your experience as a Stephen.
I'm going to take this mask off so you can actually hear me.
Yeah.
I think that prayer really kind of sums it up in such a beautiful way. It not only talks about the role of the Stephen minister, but it also talks about the fact that the Spirit is in that relationship. Yeah. And that's so important for us to realize that that is a relationship where you may see two people, but there are actually three entities in the room. And I open with that because I think it's really important, because sometimes we think that people, when we talk about have we really not been listened to, sometimes when we're not being listened to, we feel like we're being judged or we're being told what to do. And that is absolutely not what Stephen ministry is. I often say, if the problem were that easy, the person would have solved it themselves. They don't necessarily welcome someone else jumping in. So let me just say for myself, when I came to Lewes, I had just retired, and probably that's true for many of us, right? And one of the things that we all experience is this looking around for meaning. looking around for ways to contribute, looking around for ways that we can give back at this point in our lives. And as you well know, there's tons of things one can do in Lewes and Rehoboth. There are volunteers everywhere. And there are many ministries at St. Peter's, and this is one of them. What I think is special about it is that it is really a one-on-one relationship of considerable depth. It's, for me, has been such an honor to be with someone who is going through some transition in their life, be it injury or illness of themselves or someone else, a death in the family, suddenly living alone and wanting somebody to talk to about that, because that's a transition to so many things. And if we went around the room, we might find as many as the people who are here. But each one of those, in my view, kind of calls for a chance to really explore the inside of your own mind, the inside of your own soul, the inside of your own heart. And doing that alone can get you in trouble, first of all, because what are you doing talking to yourself? But often it's difficult to do that with a family member because people have views, you know, or maybe even with a friend sometimes, you know, because it gets into a dialogue. Here's what I said, here's what you said, that back and forth, you know. Whereas Stephen ministry is focused on you, the care receiver, you and what you want to talk about, you and what your needs are. And the role of the Stephen minister is primarily to listen to you. Now, that doesn't mean be silent all the time, but it does mean really engage, remember what you were talking about, be with you, help you to explore it. It's such, in my opinion, a special kind of relationship. And it's a peer. So it's not a therapist or that kind of person. You're with a person who is your peer. For me, the chance to sit back and really explore with someone where they're going and what's been going on in their lives is very unique. And that's something I suspect, although I'm not making use of Stephen ministry myself right now, that I would also welcome when I have an issue. So it's you give and you get. So I think this is really fabulous in that regard. I love that. So why be one? Why be a Stephen minister? Here, I'll tell you what I think about it. And it's a desire for a deep connection with another human being. Really wanting to put yourself in that place and to be with that person. It's a peer relationship. So you see each other in other environments and eventually you may become friends. It helps me to learn skills and to practice them. I think there's kind of a dearth in the world of good listening skills. I don't know what you all think about that, you know. So for me to be able to continue to practice that myself and to be with someone who is giving me that opportunity is really fabulous. It's also an opportunity to be part of a larger community of Stephen ministers and care receivers and to continue building our deeper relationships within St. Peter's. I personally am really moved by the opportunity to be with someone. A couple of times in the beginning of a relationship, someone said to me, you know, I don't really want to impose on you. Hardly, you know, it's not an imposition at all. I feel privileged and honored to be with that person. And I also feel the Spirit being present with us. It's a very funny thing about that because we're not solving the problem, but there's something in the Spirit moving that helps people to move themselves to wherever they need to be, not where I think they should be. And it's helped me to grow as well. So that's really what I would say about the value of it for myself. I've been doing it now for these many years. And every time I have a peer receiver, it's something different. The person is different, the issue may be different, but the process remains the same. And it's just moving to me. And Robert's going to talk a little bit about what that process looks like.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, I have to take this off too.
Yeah.
Otherwise
Put mine
I'll
back on.
fog up my glasses.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
You can have that.
Yeah.
My purpose tonight is to talk about the arc of the Stephen ministry relationship, which really means the development of that relationship between two people. I've had 4 assignments. Like Carol, we started in 2013. We were the first class. And over the years, I've had 4 gentlemen that I was assigned to. My assignments ranged from a short one of about 8 months to another that was well over 3.5 years of meeting regularly and getting to know that person and to help that person through different issues. Anyhow, I am going to base my comments on my experiences with the 4 people that I've been assigned to in the past. Beginning stage, I call it who is the care receiver. And perhaps it might be someone that you're familiar with, might be someone from our church family. You know, you've seen a face and then all of a sudden that might be the person to whom you're assigned. It might be a complete stranger. 2 of the people, 2 of my assignments were people that I knew their face, but I didn't have a relationship really with them. 2 others were complete strangers. I had never seen them before in my life. That first component, that first stage of who this person might be, has certain characteristics about it that I'd like to just share with you. These people have had a preparation. They've learned about Stephen ministry. They've talked to a leader, and they've found out what it might be like and have agreed to participate. But they don't know who their Stephen minister, is at all. So I found that when I knocked on that door that first day, that I felt anticipation. There was an openness from this person that they needed a relationship like this. They needed to express some concern, some problem, some event. There might have been a crisis that was happening in their life that they needed to express and to deal with. They are hurting on some level. They're hurting emotionally on some level. There might be a loss of control. Every day we have everyday problems that we can address and face and fix. And then there are other events and problems and situations that we don't know what to do with, and we don't know how to address them, or we don't know how to approach them. So sometimes a loss of control. These people needed support. They need understanding, and they need a sense of compassion.
Yeah.
I had one in particular that was surrounded by people, surrounded by family, surrounded by a circle of friends, and yet he felt completely alone. So that was a particular characteristic that I learned about that was extremely important. Sometimes we carry something that only we know about, and we often wish that we could talk about it with someone with whom we can trust and with someone we know who's listening. It's important, though, to also say that in the early stage, there's anticipation and a hope, to make things better. But trust is low because we're getting to know one another. So, that's at its rudimentary stage, and hopefully that will grow. The second stage is something I just call a time of trust and a time of confidentiality. So that's another extraordinary element about the Stephen ministry relationship. This is a time when the care receiver and the Stephen minister really participate with one another. The care receiver is sharing concerns, providing details through weekly meetings. open to continuing a dialogue, sharing feelings and sharing emotions. I have to underscore that. This is a time when emotions rise to the surface and are often expressed. Allowing openness to grow, openness to develop. It's also a time of asking questions. So the Stephen minister has to do his or her best to really listen and to reflect the information that you're hearing. Because your job isn't to cure any problem. Your job is to let your care receiver know what he or she is saying and help them understand what they're going through better so that they can find alternatives, they can find solutions, they can find a path to follow. The Stephen minister begins to really read more aspects of a care receiver. I know in my case, I learned to, I express it this way. I listen with my ears, but I also try to listen with my eyes. I try to listen with my heart, to really hear someone in totality. Confidentiality is paramount. Confidentiality between the minister and the care receiver supports all the growth. It supports all the trust that is there. And you have to always remember that you would never want to violate that trust because it's the major pillar that's supporting the relationship. The Stephen minister's listening grows more accurate and focused, and you really become a team. And that's the beauty of the relationship. You become a team. And hopefully you become bonded to a degree and really effective communicators. I'll just digress for a moment. And as Carol said, some of the issues, some of the themes that I encountered were illness, death and dying, grief, restructuring, redefining one's life, picking up the pieces and continuing on with one's life, loneliness, family issues, the list goes on and on and on. And also there's an element of referral because we're not people who cure all the ills that we might be listening to, but you oftentimes find yourself referring and talking about, those possibilities as well. Referring to therapists, referring to physicians, referring to community agencies, if that would be an appropriate, idea for the care receiver to consider. It's always their decision, of course. And then toward the end of that relationship, whenever that time arrives, because it could be a short term, it could be a long term experience. There will be a time when issues and events and crises subside, and that presenting problem perhaps gets solved, or it gets addressed in a way that balance comes back and people begin to cope and feel strong and they're back on their feet again. And that's the time to begin to consider ending the Stephen ministry relationship. But that's not abrupt. That's something that is suggested that when the Stephen minister and the care receiver are feeling stronger and feeling like that might be an appropriate step to take. So you give that time. In my case, my relationship with my care receivers turned into friendship. It's not a generalization. It may not be appropriate for every case, but after I took off the cap of Stephen ministry, I just put on the cap of being a friend. And why is because we went through an intense journey, whether it was short-term or long-term. We went through something that was very deeply personal, and friendship just grew. Friendship, it just, in my case, it evolved to that. And that became my reward. my unexpected and beautiful reward of being in this program. I have some unexpected friends that I cherish. And I would encourage anyone who's interested in becoming a Stephen minister to do so. And I would also encourage anyone who needs to be, who would like to be a care receiver to do so. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about being a care receiver because I've done that twice. The first time was not at St. Peter's. It was about 13 years ago. And my husband became seriously ill. I was trying to work full time, get him to doctor's appointments, and then we heard the cancer word. And my world was upside down. I could not make sense of anything. But I was in a parish that had Stephen ministry, and I went and said, I need a Stephen minister. I needed an hour a week away from the job, away from caregiving, where I could just sit down and process everything that had gone on for the week, try to make sense of it, and then figure out how am I a caregiver as well as working for the next week. And to have somebody listen to me was so helpful. And one thing is very simple, but it stands out in my mind. One time I was at a total loss. My husband had an appointment coming up. He was insisting he would drive. I could not take off work, and I didn't want him driving. But I couldn't see the fact until my Stephen minister said, do you have a friend or a neighbor that could drive him? And I went, oh, yeah, I do. But you get so enmeshed in a situation that you cannot process. So we got through that. He got into stability. He got into remission, and we were about to end the relationship. But I asked her to continue a little bit longer because I was retiring and moving. So I knew those were big transitions. I didn't really need a lot of help, but it was nice to have someone there to just listen. So then we moved down here. And I met Jeff. And as we are meeting Jeff and telling him who we are, I happened to mention that years before I had been trained in 1980s as a Stephen minister, and I was a Stephen leader. And those skills I had been using in my life ever since. Even though when I got in my own crisis, I couldn't use the skills. So I was very glad to be here and when this program started up. Fast forward a couple of years, my husband had some ups and downs, and suddenly he was down, and Jeff said to me, do you need a Stephen minister? Oh, no, I don't need a Stephen minister. I'm fine. Somebody else came along and said, Eleanor, don't you want a Stephen minister? I'm like, wait a minute, I'm training in this program. I know these skills. I don't need a Stephen minister. Carlisle comes along and says, Eleanor, don't you think you need a Stephen minister? And I finally realized I was crying all the time. I was not processing anything. I wasn't being a good caregiver. And I needed a Stephen minister. And that was such a different relationship because this time around, my husband had so many issues going on, not just the cancer. I was so emotionally flooded all the time that I needed somebody to help me through where I was and then help me learn how to be a better caregiver. And then it ended up at a wonderful friendship. But with that person, I don't know how, I learned so much about myself that down the road, when my husband passed away, I was able to remain strong. I was able to remain doing what I needed to do. I was able to transition to living alone. It wasn't easy. And there was one time in getting ready for the funeral where I picked up the phone and I called her and I said, there's this situation going on with my kids and I don't know what to do. And she just listened to me. And then I went, oh, okay. And I moved forward. But those were the two different times I've been a care receiver. In each of these situations, it was so, the first time particularly, to have somebody walk with me in a way that nobody ever had in my life, to not feel like I was alone, to begin to really understand what it means to be told that God is with us all the time, or for somebody to say to me, I'm praying for you. I'm like, what, me, what? You know, it was in both of those situations, I grew in my faith immensely. And I'm fortunate to not only be a Stephen minister, Stephen leader, but having been a care receiver. And I have learned in all three of those roles so much over and over and over again. And that's why I remain in the program, because it keeps the skills that I've learned alive. It keeps me open to other people, and it helps me to continue to grow. And it keeps me in a community of people that I know I'm not alone, and that I'm loved, and that I can give love. So, thank you.
I'll unmask. Oh, good evening. Let me begin by recalling a bedrock principle of Stephen ministry, which you've heard, and that is strict confidentiality, which I think is essential for fostering candor and trust in the relationship. So I had serious reservations about participating in this forum tonight, which after all pulls aside the curtain of anonymity that normally shields care receivers like me. But I agreed to do so if it might help others in pain or in need. 6 years ago, faced with the impending loss of my wife to Parkinson's disease, I took up the offer of one-to-one spiritual support through Stephen Ministry at St. Peter's. It's been said that mature spirituality shows us how to enter trustingly into the dark periods of life. And these dark periods are good teachers. That is true. I can attest to that. It's hard. It's certainly less hard when not facing it alone. But my personal challenge was how to move beyond despair, to somehow get my bearings spiritually so that I could live and grow again. The best way I can describe my experience as a care receiver is spiritual friendship. By this, I mean friendship that's utterly realistic and honest in a way that other acquaintances and family, even with best intentions, are unable to be. For me, this was a transformative experience. It meant confronting hard reality, letting go of hope as wishful thinking, and in the process, astonishingly, becoming aware of the Holy Spirit working with us and in us. After a time, I sensed that I was ready to close this chapter, but my Stephen minister and I remain good friends. When I first turned to Stephen ministry, grieving and enraged, I seriously wondered how I could find any hope. After all, where is the room for hope or for God when the love of your life is given the diagnosis degenerative and incurable? As I now realize, mature Christian hope is not about wishing for good outcomes. I see it instead as a humble purposefulness. For me, this kind of hope enables me to press on, trusting in God's self-emptying love, whatever may befall. Such a journey is necessarily solitary, but it is not lonely. Spiritual friendship really is walking together in hope. And this, I've come to appreciate, is what Stephen Ministry is all about. Thank you.
So my journey to Stephen Ministry began actually about 6 or 7 years ago, believe it or not, while attending services here at St. Peter's. Ted and I were still residents up in Pennsylvania, but we worshiped here on weekends when we would come down. And I can still picture the banner that right now hangs in the chancel, the Stephen Ministry banner. And it would always catch my eye when I would come and before service. And so much so that it kind of spurred me on to go on the internet and start reading about what Stephen Ministry is all about. And I remember that after, some prayer and some discernment, I knew in my heart that this was the ministry that God was calling me to, even before we became members here at St. Peter's. But after moving down here to Millsboro in the fall of 2019, I formally expressed my interest in Stephen Ministry with Carlisle and Donna, and I began training in January of 2021. So because of COVID, we all remember COVID, right? All my training was on Zoom. And it posed a particular challenge to all the Stephen leaders who are teaching the program. And hopefully, in the future, we can offer our training in person. I think it's so important. But while there are texts and lessons to read, so much of the training is really hands-on. Participants have lots and lots of opportunities to dialogue with one another and opportunities to actually practice the skills being presented. So Stephen Ministry training, the course itself, it consists of 18 modules. They're taught in 2.5-hour segments over the course of about 18 weeks. Candidates are presented with 5 resources, and these are absolutely wonderful. So the first one is the training manual, which is volume 1, which has modules 1 to 14, and then volume 2, which is modules 15 to 25. And you probably are saying, well, he just said there's 18. Well, there's actually 7 additional modules afterwards that are used for continuing ed.
So extra credit.
They're extra credit, exactly. And then there are 3 additional resources. One is Christian Caregiving, a Way of Life. That text, Speaking the Truth in Love, How to Be an Assertive Christian, which we all long to be, and When and How to Use Mental Health Resources. So these are some additional resources that are used in the course of the training itself. Since training sessions are once a week, there's plenty of time to read and to reflect on each of the modules. Typically, there are about 12 to 15 pages each week to read in the manuals themselves, and then along with the supplemental readings. And if any of you have done EFM, I can tell you I did it EFM several years back. It's not nearly as bad, trust me. So few of the topics that we cover, and I could go through the manual itself, but the ones that jumped out for me as I was kind of looking through the manual again, topics like a process approach to caring, the art of listening, just being a good listener, Maintaining boundaries, and that's important whenever you have a care receiver, kind of making sure that you kind of keep that ministerial boundary as you move forward. Confidentiality, which Chris spoke about, ministering to those experiencing grief or depression. And then another piece, which is supervision. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. One thing that I quickly came to realize during the training is that many of the lessons and the practices help us not only to become effective Stephen ministers, but also better and more responsive listeners to our friends and to our family members. And I found myself going through the training. I was practicing on TED quite a bit, actually. But it really, you start to learn those skills of what is really needed to kind of focus in and just not being reactive, not being responsive all the time, but just listening. So during the course of training, individuals are drawn more deeply into community, into discipleship, into a relationship with Christ and with one another. When I began training in January 2021, I had never met several of my classmates. But by the end of the training, 18 weeks later, we had established strong bonds of trust and friendship. So a wonderful component of Stephen ministry is that after the completion of the training, we remain connected with one another through twice-a-month supervision sessions and ongoing education sessions. So what's wonderful about this, and I think it's really, really brought home during the training, is that you're not trained and then sent off and you're on your own and figure it out. Not at all. You have that constant support of the other Stephen ministry ministers who are helping you, who are guiding you, who are affirming what you are doing with your care receiver. So it's that for me has been such a blessing. So I completed my training in 2021 and I was assigned a care receiver just last July. So I just hit my 1-year anniversary with my care receiver. And my journey with him, I thought of 3 things. It's a gift, it's a grace, and it's a blessing. So after further discernment, I completed Stephen leadership training last fall. And I have shared with so many of my fellow Stephen ministers that really going through this process of Stephen ministry training and Stephen leadership training really for me became the impetus and the awakening for me to return to ordained ministry within the Episcopal Church, and process which is quickly nearing completion. So we are planning a new training session beginning most likely, I think, October. That's our goal. And if Stephen ministry, after hearing some of the reflections tonight, if it's something that you feel that you're being called to, and I think that's one thing that you need to listen to the voice of the Spirit, because you will know if you are being called to Stephen ministry. I really encourage you to have conversation with Father Jeff, or with Carlisle, with any of the Stephen ministers that you know in the parish. And please, if you have specific questions about Stephen ministry, we're here and we're happy to have those conversations with you. So I'd like to leave you with a passage from Philippians 1:4-6 that actually forms the basis for the very first training session of Stephen ministry. So if you decide to go through training, you will hear this passage in your first session. So in all my prayers for you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he began a good work in you and will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Donna, can I just say something?
Sure.
There's a whole table of materials over there, not only for the training, but a lot of the programs that Stephen Ministry has. One of the things we do when somebody has the loss of a spouse or somebody significant to them, we have a series of 4 little pamphlets that go out to them over the course of a year, and that's the grief program over there. So feel free to just browse and ask questions.
Well, I feel so honored to have listened to each of you, and I'm just glad I'm in relationship with each of you. And thank you. Every one of you shared very openly and vulnerably. And this is your opportunity. If you have any comments to make, any questions, something sparked your curiosity and you'd like to know a little bit more, please, ask any one of these people right now. This is a chance to continue some conversation. And we do have some Stephen ministers here tonight, so after a bit, maybe they can identify themselves as well. Or if you have something you'd like to share, please do so.
Is the Stephen Ministry open to any religion? Or do you have to be Episcopal?
No, it started out in the Methodist Church, and now they train anybody. If a church signs up with Stephen Ministry, then you become a Stephen Ministry church. And they have now branched out to non-religious settings as well.
Okay.
And